Chapter 14. Eric braced himself against the wall as the entryway exploded. The door flew off the lock, and a figure erupted into the space. Eric wasn't going to wait around this time, not when his mother desperately needed him to step up. He aimed in the direction of the doorway and opened fire. The man who entered instantly fell back, and Eric was filled with dueling emotions of triumph and revulsion. He watched as the man's body hit the floor, his vision solidifying on the body of his father. "Dad!" Eric screamed in horror. Carolyn sat bolt upright, nearly ripping out her stitches as she threw herself off the couch. "Sam!" she exclaimed, looking down in panic. "Oh, God, no!" Eric's shaking fingers slackened, and the gun fell from his grip, clattering to the floor. His back pressed against the wall, almost as though he were trying to push through it and out into the open air. Just then, a second figure appeared in the doorway, far larger and armed to the teeth. A familiar face grimaced and gritted its teeth as it fired out from an automatic rifle down the hallway towards some unseen enemies. "Joe!" Carolyn screamed. And Eric instantly recognized his Uncle Joe, standing there in the doorway. He turned his attention toward Carolyn, and his eyes fell on the prone body of Eric's father. "Sam!" he cried out, diving into the room and falling to his knees. He placed a massive hand on Sam's chest before reaching up to smack him on the cheek. "Sam, stay with me, buddy." Time seemed to freeze for Eric, the guilt and shame he felt crashing down on him with the weight and magnitude of an avalanche. How could he live with himself now? How could he ever recover from something so horrible, so devastating, so undeniably? His thoughts stopped when he saw the body of his father move, his head shaking back and forth. "It's fine," his strong, unshakable voice said. "I'm fine. The shot missed me." Eric exhaled, and the world resumed its normal rotation once more. The relief in the air was palpable between Eric and his mother and uncle, all of whom feared the worst in those horrifying seconds. "Dad!" Eric called out as Sam started to stand. He dashed around the couch and threw himself at the man, wrapping his arms around his father's armored torso and burying his face in Sam's chest. "Dad, I'm so sorry." "It's fine, son," Sam said. "You just get back," Joe yelled. Pushing the father and son away from the door, he popped out into the hallway and laid down some gunfire at whoever was out there. Eric could now hear the undeniable sound of return fire and realized quickly that while they were reunited, they were far from safe. "What's going on?" Carolyn asked, her eyes darting toward the door, as Sam grabbed onto both her and Eric and pulled them farther into the room. "Who's shooting at you?" "Cartel," Sam hissed through his teeth, as he had them take cover behind the couch. "No," Carolyn said, her voice horrified as the weight of that revelation sunk in. Eric had heard his parents mention the cartel before. He didn't know much about them, only that it was once his father's job as part of the NYPD to fight against them, and that he'd made enemies who forced him to retire from the police force. Eric often assumed his dad's bad knee had something to do with the cartel. But when he asked about it, neither of his parents would give him a straight answer. He watched as Sam scanned the room, his eyes lingering on the bloody bandages still sitting on the coffee table from when he'd patched up his mother. "What happened?" Sam asked, his face flush with concern. "Are you two all right?" "It's fine, Sam," Carolyn replied, laying a hand on his chest. "I took some shrapnel to the abdomen, and Eric helped me stitch myself back up." Sam looked down at his wife's stomach, his hands reaching for her momentarily, before he suddenly seemed to remember that there was a very real and present danger drawing closer to them. "Shit!" Joe yelled from the hallway, diving back into the apartment. "What happened?" Sam asked, looking up at his old friend. "I dropped 3 of them, but the other 5 are still advancing," Joe replied, falling back into the room. "They're lobbing Molotov cocktails now." "Are you all right, Uncle Joe?" Eric asked, his stomach bunching up with concern. Joe's face was pale and covered in sweat. His huge arms were streaked with blood, bruises, and dirt. But he tried to muster up a confident smile for Eric's sake. "No sweat, kid," he replied. "We got this." Eric saw smoke pouring in from the hallway and realized the cartel members pursuing his father and uncle were lighting the hallway on fire. "We need to get out," Carolyn said, reaching down to grab her gun off the floor until the act of bending forced a quick grunt of pain from her. "The building's lower levels are on fire too," Sam said. And Carolyn's face fell with dread. "We're going to need to go out the fire escape." As Eric started to consider this latest turn of events, a flaming bundle flew in through the doorway and smashed into the wooden floor. The fire spread instantly, and all 4 of them fell back toward the window. Eric practically tripped over his mother's gun, which was still sitting on the floor. He went to reach for it, but the memory of that fateful shot that had nearly ended his father's life came back to haunt him, and he froze. Joe reached down and grabbed the gun, forcibly placing it in Eric's hands. "You got this, kid," Joe said, giving the boy a reassuring look. "Just shoot it at the bad guys this time, all right?" Joe gave him a wink, trying to put his mind at ease. But after what he'd just been through and what was happening around them, this felt like an impossible task. He noticed his uncle's face turning with dread toward the fire, watching with wide eyes as it spread in front of them. From the other side of the door, Eric saw the silhouettes of several men appear, and they hurled more flaming bottles at them. The Molotov cocktails exploded and sent flames spreading throughout the apartment. Joe just stood there like a lumbering statue, dumbstruck by what was going on in front of them. "Uncle Joe!" Eric yelled out, shoving the big man. Joe seemed to snap out of his stupor, falling back with the rest of the family. Sam shouldered past him, gun drawn, as he opened fire at the figures by the door. "Joe, open the window," Sam called out over his shoulder. Joe leaned heavily against the wall, his eyes still wide and huge, as the inferno spread. "Joe!" Sam screamed back at him, still firing at the men in the doorway. Eric realized something was seriously wrong with his uncle, so he ran to the broken window himself and pried it open. He instantly noticed the air was hazy, with smoke coming up from below. "Shit," Eric said, looking down. "Get your mother out," Sam screamed. And Eric instantly complied. "Mom, come on," he called out to her, over the sound of gunfire and chewing flames. She nodded to him, still clutching at her stomach. Eric grabbed the bug-out bags they had gathered from the apartment and gently led his mother onto the fire escape. He then followed after her. "Dad! Uncle Joe, come on!" he screamed, reaching inside to pull on his uncle. "Joe! Get out there!" Sam screamed back. But the big man didn't move. Finally, Sam turned and shoved Joe toward the open window. This seemed to wake him up once more, and he scrambled to squeeze his bulky body out through the space. "Uncle Joe, are you all right?" Eric asked, looking the big man in the eye. He saw a flash of anger cross over his uncle's face, but it wasn't anger at him, or even at the men attacking them. He seemed distraught and shook his head in frustration, looking back inside the apartment as Sam continued to back toward the window, firing wildly to keep their attackers at bay. I'm good, Joe said, leaning back through the window to grab Sam and pull him by the shirt. Sam seemed to take the hint and followed Joe's momentum, scrambling out with him onto the fire escape. Quickly, Sam said to them, pointing down toward the street. We have to get down. It's the only way out. Eric gazed down toward the street, his breath catching in his throat. They were so high up, with nothing more than metal bars separating them from the open air. But as he looked around at his father, haggard and exhausted, his uncle, angry and still shuddering, and his mother, hunched over in pain, he realized he had no right to fear. Let's go, Dad, Eric said, clapping his father on the shoulder. We're with you. Let's get the hell out of here. Chapter 15. Sam was the last to drop off the final rung of the fire escape into the alleyway below. While smoke had obscured their descent, the four of them had managed to make it down to the ground level without incident. We all good? Sam asked, looking over Eric and Carolyn carefully. Carolyn's hands were orbiting around her abdomen, and he worried for a moment that his wife might have popped her stitches. But she gave him a reassuring nod that seemed to say she was feeling all right and ready to travel. All good, sir, Eric said, nodding to his father and deferring to his experience and wisdom to lead them through this chaos. Sam looked over at Joe, who stood off to the side, shaking his head and looking up at the building. Hey, big man, Sam said, walking over and lowering his voice. You good here? Joe didn't respond at first. He didn't even look over at Sam. Instead, he shifted his gaze up toward the apartment window, which now belched black smoke into the sky. I let you down up there, Joe said, shaking his head. There was a slight tremble in his bottom lip, and Sam knew it was taking everything his friend had not to break down in that alley. Stop that, Sam said, pointing his index finger into Joe's broad chest. If it weren't for you, my gimpy ass would have never made it here, so I don't want to hear that shit. All right, soldier? Joe nodded, but still couldn't bring himself to look over at Sam. Unfortunately, they had no time to unpack these emotions here, as smoke continued to waft out from the building. Sam only hoped that any other residents who might have still been present managed to get themselves out. And he silently cursed Roja for putting more innocents in danger, just to get at him. We need to move, Sam said aloud, taking charge of the situation. And I mean right now, we have to get out of this city. Because of the cartel? Eric asked, looking around as if monstrous drug pushers were going to leap out of the smoke to attack them at any moment. Partly, Sam replied, but I'm also worried about those bombs going off in the city. I have a feeling they're not done. There hasn't been an explosion in over 12 hours, Carolyn noted, pointing out at the city. I was hoping we were past all that. I doubt it, Sam said grimly. It's like a fireworks show on the 4th of July. You start off with some single bursts, then you move on to some more intricate displays. But then you close things out with the grand finale. I really don't like the sound of that, Eric said, dread giving weight to his every syllable as his head hung low. Me neither, son, Sam said, laying a strong hand on Eric's shoulder. Which is why I want to get the hell out of here before the sky comes raining down on us. Oh, you're going nowhere, pendejo. Julio's unmistakable voice cut through the air, and the drug lord stalked out of the smoke, as if magically appearing in their midst. Right behind him came the hulking bodies of 15 armed cartel soldiers. Damn it, Sam growled, suddenly cursing himself for staying put for too long. Of course, Roja had been watching the exits. He understood they'd be trying to make their escape from the burning building and was lying in wait like a perfect predator. Joe walked up beside Sam as they stood arm in arm in front of Carolyn and Eric. "We can take them, Dad," Eric said, walking up behind him. Sam held out an arm to bar his son's path. "No," Sam replied, his voice tense and nostrils flaring. He looked back at his son with longing desperation, an unquestioned need to keep him safe. Eric was a strong kid, and he was only getting stronger as Sam continued to grow weaker with time. But in that alleyway, as far as Sam was concerned, he was still that little 8-pound infant the nurse had handed him, swaddled in a blue blanket on the day of his birth. He whispered back to his son, "You need to stay back and make a run for it when I say so." "That's crap, Dad," Eric protested, pulling Carolyn's gun from his pocket. "I can fight." "I know you can," Sam replied. "I've spent your entire life making sure of that, but I need you to protect your mother right now, you understand me? I'm entrusting you with the most precious person in my world. That's a sacred need, son." Eric looked as though he wanted to protest further, but then he glanced over at his mother, still holding her wounded stomach, her flesh pale and slick with sweat. She wouldn't be able to fight. She needed someone beside her, and that had to be Eric. Sam would need Joe to help him clear out the riffraff. "Sorry, hope I'm not interrupting anything over there," Julio said mockingly. His jeering laughter was echoed by the mindless drones that lined up behind him. Sam looked over at Joe, who seemed to be waking up from the stupor he'd been in. Joe returned his stare with narrowed eyes and a meaningful nod that seemed to scream that he was ready for action. But the odds were stacked highly against them here. They were 2 men, against a force of 16 in an open space with nowhere to take cover. This fight would be over in seconds, unless Sam could think of something, anything he could do to shift the situation in their favor. "I think we got you at a bit of a disadvantage over there," Julio sneered, reveling in his moment of ultimate victory. "Man, it's going to be all too easy to wipe out your pathetic asses." Julio and his men laughed again. But then the drug lord paused and seemed to contemplate the situation. "Actually, it's going to be way too easy now that I think about it." "The hell are you talking about?" Sam asked, finding his voice and trying to put up a strong front. He didn't want Roja to know how terrified he actually was. Not for himself, mostly. He'd long ago accepted the fact that an untimely death was quite possibly in his future. But he was terrified for his wife and son. He was terrified for his best friend. The fact that they would join him in oblivion, that they would pay for the resentment he fostered in this maniac, was his worst nightmare brought to life. "I'm saying," Rojas said, pacing back and forth in front of them, knowing full well that he was in complete control of the situation, "that I've been thinking about the day I put you in the ground for years, and I feel like watching you get gunned down like a dog just isn't satisfying enough. I want to kill you myself with my own 2 hands. Actually, change that. I want to beat you to within an inch of your life. Then I want to make you watch while I kill your family over there. And then, when your last spark of hope burns out, I want to jam a blade through your eye and watch you bleed out on the ground." "Well, what's stopping you?" Sam growled, trying to maintain his composure. But those harsh words from Roja had rattled him to his core. "Nothing, pendejo," Rojas said, his voice dropping as he savored the moment. "Nothing at all. This is all I've ever wanted, but I don't want it so easily. I have an idea." You and me, one-on-one, a duel, bare hands only. You kill me, and you can walk. I beat you, and you watch as I kill your family. A duel? Sam spat, his mind reeling. What is this, a Western? Hey, I'm a man of honor, Julio said. I'll stand here with my second and face you like a man. You agree to my terms. Choose a second of your own to stand behind you, and we fight it out the way it should be. A calm stillness settled over the alleyway. Sam looked over at Joe, whose eyebrows were raised. He gave Sam a strong nod. This was the kind of scenario Joe lived for. An honorable fight, man versus man, all out to the end. It's your only way out, Shields, Rojas said, with a twisted smile. And Sam knew he was right. Yet still he hesitated. He wasn't a young man anymore, and while his skills were still above the average person's, he wasn't sure he'd be able to match Julio Rojas blow for blow. He looked back at Eric, standing protectively in front of his mother, Carolyn's handgun still clutched in his fist. What was the alternative here? Try to shoot their way out and be gunned down within a minute? No, that wasn't in the realm of possibility. The only way he could possibly ensure his family's survival was to fight. And so he would fight. You're on, Sam said, holstering his gun and staring a hole through Rojas' remaining eye. Great, Rojas said, his lips splitting to show the metallic gleam of his grill. Who's your second, then? Who's going to watch your back? My brother-in-arms is going to have my back, Sam said, pointing over at Joe. He didn't want Rojas to know Joe's name or anything about him. Joe had already done enough to earn the ire of this vicious killer with his words earlier in the day. Sam didn't want to provide more details than were needed. Joe made a fist and thumped it over his heart, showing solidarity with his best friend in this time of great need. Which one of your sycophants has your back? Rojas scoffed. You think I trust any of these idiots to watch my back? Rojas asked, gesturing back at his men, who didn't even flinch at the insult. Nah, with something as important as this, you can only turn to family. Rojas turned and looked back at his men, then returned his gaze to Sam. I choose my tío. Don Eduardo Rojas is my second. Sam drew a sharp intake of breath as the soldiers parted like some kind of living gateway. His eyes narrowed as a figure limped past them, a straw hat shielding his face from the sun. Though he was withered and walked with a hunch, Sam could feel the power in every step of this legendary cartel figure. He'd pursued Don Eduardo in the past, but the old man was slick and spry. He was sharp as a tack and understood the rules that bound law enforcement officers. He was a true, larger-than-life figure, and even age seemed unable to snuff out that undeniable presence. The old man stopped beside his nephew, glaring at Sam with hatred and complete malice. He spat on the ground, showing his disdain for the former NYPD superstar, and laid a shaking, liver-spotted hand on the shoulder of his beloved nephew. You've troubled our family for the last time, pig, the Don said to Shields, his voice shaking with age, but no less powerful as it filled the alleyway. Sam wanted to snap back at the old man, to tell him that he still had some trouble to cause for the Rojas family, but he kept his mouth shut. Jaw-jacking with the Don would do nothing to help his cause. It would only serve to anger Julio, who seemed to be in a jovial mood at the moment. Anger would make him fight harder from the start, and Sam didn't want that. He was hoping to use Rojas' overconfidence against him and overwhelm him early. Insulting his uncle would only undercut his plans for some temporary satisfaction. Let's get this over with, Sam growled at the pair of drug lords. The Don remained stoic, his stare unblinking as he tore through Sam with his eyes. Julio laughed, that confidence continuing to ooze its way out of him. Fine, Julio said. You have 2 minutes to make your plans. Julio turned around, placing an arm around his uncle as the two of them started to strategize. Sam moved toward Joe, who had his arms crossed over his chest. This is it, Joe said to Sam as he approached. This is what you've been waiting for. What I've been waiting for is a chance to get the hell out of here, Sam responded, shaking his head in disgust. This is just theater. It's Roja trying to entertain himself. And now you can use that to right a major wrong in your life, brother, Joe responded, laying a heavy hand on Sam's shoulder. You can fight and get your honor back. This isn't feudal Japan, Sam responded, looking behind Joe over at Carolyn and Eric, who both had their eyes glued to him. My family is at stake here. That's true, it is, Joe responded, not taking his eyes off Sam. So fight hard. Fight hard? Sam responded, his gaze turning back to his friend and brother. That's your advice? What do you want me to tell you, to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee? Joe scoffed. But Sam didn't laugh, or even crack a smile at the joke. Look, just go in there and fight him. He's got one freaking eye, so his depth perception is going to be off. Use that to your advantage. Try to attack from that side as much as you can. Right, Sam said, seeing the wisdom in this tactic. He's also going to be coming for that bad wheel of yours, Joe said, pointing down at Sam's injured knee. So keep it out of reach and be ready. Also true, Sam said. He's cocky, Joe continued. You can see it in the way he's talking. He thinks you're used up. He wants to wreck you in front of your family, embarrass you. He wants to use you to boost his soldiers' morale and their fear of him. But you're Sam fucking Shields. You're better than that. You're not some pawn to be used for power games. You're the guy who cut out this piece of shit's eye. You're the most decorated narcotics officer in the history of the NYPD. And you fought your way through plenty of scumbags to get here and save your family. So finish the job, man. Save your family. Save yourself. Sam felt the power of Joe's words filling his heart. Those words bumped through his arteries, coursing through his body, filling his muscles with life and power. He could do this. He'd fought this man before and lived. Not many people were able to say that about Julio Roja. Off the top of his head, Sam couldn't think of a single other example. He was out of practice, but his skills were still sharper than most. He'd still managed to make his way here like Joe had said. Sam glanced back at his wife and son one more time. Eric was looking at him with wide-eyed fear. Seeing that look of terror on the face of his boy broke Sam's heart. He wanted to make sure Eric could leave this city, return to the farm, and live out his days there happily. That place was his birthright, and always would be. Dad, Eric called out, letting go of Carolyn and walking up to Sam and Joe. Dad, don't do this. We can fight them all together. No, son, Sam said, shaking his head to stop Eric's thought process right then and there. We can't. There are some battles that can't be won. But we have a chance here. Dad, what if you can't beat him? Eric insisted, his anxieties playing out over his face in the form of a desperate, pleading stare. That's enough, Joe said, sharply cutting off the young man. Sam looked over at Joe in surprise, but decided not to intervene. Eric's eyes went right to Joe and watched in shock as his uncle glowered down at him. You need to have some faith in your father. You don't know what he's done in his life. You don't know what he's done to get here in the first place. This man right here, my best friend in the world, your father, is a certified grade A badass. He's gonna go out there and he's gonna take this fucker's other eye before sending him straight to hell. And he doesn't need to hear his only son telling him that he can't do it. Is that understood, kid? Eric gaped at the big man, looking to his father to see if he would say something to defend him or admonish Joe in some way for speaking to him like that. But Sam kept his face still and severe, showing solidarity with Joe and silent appreciation for the words he spoke. I'm sorry. Uncle Joe, you're right, Eric stammered, looking up at Joe before turning his eyes back to his father. You can do it, Dad. Please do it. We're counting on you. I got this, son, Sam said, reaching out and touching his son along the side of his face. I promise. We're going home. Eric nodded to him and then stepped back beside his mother. Sam looked over at Carolyn, and despite her pain, her face was severe, her lips together in a tight line. Sam tried to reassure her, but all he could manage was a sad half-smile. She was as pragmatic as he was, and she knew how dangerous Roja was. But despite all of that, she nodded to him, giving him her seal of approval. Her stare seemed to tell him that he could do this, that she believed in him, and more importantly, that she was counting on him. Time's up, Shields, Roja called out. And Sam tore his gaze away from his wife, his eyes hardening to cold steel as he turned to fix this monster in his sights. Joe's hand settled onto his shoulder again. You got this, brother, Joe said. Show him what fear is. Wipe that smile off his face. Julio's smile was oozing confidence as he paced back and forth, looking at Sam like a caged jungle cat who knew he would be fed very soon. Sam tried not to be intimidated by it, but he would have been lying to himself had he not acknowledged the anxious tremor that shook his every breath. He wanted very badly at that moment to wipe the smile off Roja's face, to embarrass him in front of his uncle and his soldiers. But he couldn't let his personal feelings override the stakes here. The lives of his wife, son, and best friend were on the line, and Sam couldn't lose himself in a vendetta. Fighting for the people he loved filled him with a sense of purpose, a strength that overrode his fears. That was far stronger than any personal animosity could ever make him. I got this, Sam whispered to Joe, taking off his backpack and laying it on the ground. He removed his jacket and gun holster next, followed by his shirt, until he was standing in just his jeans, a black tank top undershirt, and the steel-toed work boots that he knew would be the key to doing a lot of damage here. Oh, shit, Roja exclaimed. The gringo came to play, boys. He looked back at his men with a mocking grin, and they obediently laughed at what he'd said, like the trained animals they were. Roja removed his gun holster and handed it off to his uncle. He also pulled a knife out of his boot and tossed it to the side. Finally, he unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a chiseled physique covered in an endless mural of tattoos that blended together to cover nearly every inch of his exposed flesh. Sam watched as Julio's smile faded, sinking back behind his lips as they pressed together. The joy melted from his single eye as he narrowed it in concentration. Let's dance, pendejo, he growled, and Sam walked forward, ready for the battle of his life. Chapter 16. Sam raised his fists, his eyes narrowing in concentration as he stalked toward his opponent. While Julio appeared to have sharpened his focus just before the battle began, Sam could tell by his nonchalant stance that he still wasn't taking this fight seriously. He must have believed Sam had spent the last several years growing complacent and fat, sitting with his family and neglecting his body and skill. He was about to find out how wrong he was. As Sam approached, Julio suddenly sprang into action, aiming a low kick at his injured knee. Sam knew this would be the plan, and he was prepared for it. He stepped back, avoiding the blow, and struck while his opponent was still off balance. Sam jabbed Julio in the face twice, forcing him onto his back foot. Before Roja could counter, Sam switched it up and sent a left hooking punch careening into the side of the drug lord's face. Julio, completely taken off guard by the speed and severity of the attack, fell onto his side, quickly rolling away as Sam attempted to pursue him. He rose to one knee and struck out with a fist, aiming at Sam's stomach. Sam twisted at the last minute, trying to dodge out of the way, but Julio managed to strike him in the kidney. Sam recoiled, stepping back and attempting to kick Julio back down while he was still kneeling. Julio, now fully prepared for Sam's superior speed, rolled to the side, coming up to his feet gingerly and charging again. Rojo slammed into Sam with his shoulder and side, forcing the former officer to stumble back. Julio followed him in, swinging with a punch to the side of the head that Sam blocked. But this seemed to be Julio's plan all along. While Sam was preoccupied with intercepting the punch, Julio stepped inside his guard and kicked at his injured leg, striking Sam in the side of the knee. Sam's leg buckled instantly as white-hot pain climbed intensely up his thigh and centered itself around his hip. Sam crashed hard to the ground, taking the brunt of the fall with his forearm, which tore and bled on the unforgiving pavement. Roja wasn't giving him even a second to catch his breath. He closed the distance between them in a heartbeat and kicked out, striking Sam in the side of the head with the sole of his boot. Sam's mind began to swim through a haze of incoherence as the world spun around him. Everything felt numb, and sounds took on a strange distortion. Then, Julio slammed his boot down hard on Sam's knee, and the world came back into sharp focus once more as agony tore through him. Sam screamed in pain, kicking out with his good leg to force Roja back. Julio took a few steps away, and Sam rolled in the opposite direction. Sam rose to his good knee, keeping his injured leg off to the side. He clutched at it desperately, wincing through the pain. "Damn," Julio said with an infuriating smile. "You're doing a lot better than I thought you would, old man." Sam tried to tune him out and summon his strength to get back up and continue the fight. "Though I could have ended it right there, just so you know." He was bluffing. He had to be. Sam tried to push through all of this pointless bravado and keep his attention focused on the task at hand. Julio Roja was a diseased maniac, and he wasn't going to let this piece of filth get inside his head. Not now and not ever. "You don't believe me?" Julio asked in response to Sam's grim silence and piercing glare. "Well, maybe I just have to prove it then." Julio didn't advance. He simply stood there, waiting, looking expectantly at Sam. He realized the drug lord was letting him get back to his feet. He was toying with him now. Sam vowed that would be a mistake Julio Roja lived to regret. He struggled for a few seconds, trying and failing to rise. Each time he tried to place weight on his injured leg, a fresh stab of pain forced him back down. Finally, he gritted his teeth and managed to get his good leg under him enough to make it back to a standing position, using just one leg. Sam gingerly set down his other foot, testing it by placing small amounts of weight on that side. It was painful, but manageable. He'd need to end this fast. He wasn't sure how long he'd be able to fight on only one leg. Roja would be more than a challenge for him at his full strength. Even without an eye, Roja didn't seem to have lost a step. Sam felt as though the hands of time had turned back to that fateful day. The two of them had traded fists for the first time. Only this time, Sam was older, slower, and injured, while Roja retained the same speed, strength, and ferocity that had seen him through the battle. "You ready now?" Roja asked him, nodding down at his injured leg, which was still partially raised off the ground. "Shut up and fight," Sam growled, no longer able to suck up this mockery with stoic silence. "As you insist," Roja said, running in and predictably going for Sam's knee once more with another powerful kick. But Sam hopped off to the side, taking himself completely out of Julio's destructive path and placing him in the blind spot left by his missing eye. Sam swung with all his might, connecting a devastating punch to the side of Julio's head, coming right from his blind spot. He cried out and stumbled back. Sam pressed the advantage, moving in with a quick punch to the throat that sent Roja reeling. The drug lord spun, trying to catch his breath while unknowingly giving his back to his opponent. Sam took advantage of that situation by wrapping one of his strong arms around Julio's throat and squeezing with all of his might. Julio started to panic as he felt his windpipe close off, flailing his arms, swiping back to take shots at Sam's head and face. But Sam was ready for this, leaning back to ensure he was out of Julio's path of destruction. Julio started to flail with greater intensity, and Sam responded by squeezing that much harder. Julio responded by throwing his body weight to the side, forcing Sam to move with him and adjust his own balance. This placed an enormous amount of weight on Sam's injured leg, causing his knee to buckle. Sam cried out in pain, releasing his hold on Julio, just enough for the drug lord to slither out of his grip. They crashed to the ground together, their limbs still tangled as they wrestled for positioning. Julio managed to tear himself free as Sam desperately tried to get an arm back around his throat. Lashing back with his elbow, Julio struck Sam in the nose, causing him to recoil in shock as the world blurred. Julio was on his feet again, his face contorted in rage. It was clear by the shock and anger in his eye that he understood exactly how close he had come to losing not only the fight, but his life as well. "You stupid son of a bitch," he screamed, rearing back to kick Sam hard in the chest. Sam fell back, his head bouncing off the ground as blood trickled onto his lips from his very broken nose. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" Julio grabbed Sam by the injured leg and yanked hard on it, nearly pulling his hip out of its socket. He wrapped one arm around Sam's calf and used his free hand to punch Sam's kneecap, again and again. Sam cried out in pain as the barrage continued, the pure agony of the situation enough to drive anyone mad. He kicked out with his free leg, hitting Julio in the shoulder multiple times before he got lucky and managed to connect the sole of his boot with the side of Julio's face. Roja let go of his leg and rolled away. As he came up, Sam could see a boot imprint against his cheek and forehead. "Come on, Dad!" Eric screamed from the sidelines, breaking through the spectator silence that had fallen over the battlefield since the start of this showdown. The sound of his son's voice instantly reminded Sam of what he was fighting for. He rose to one knee, just as Roja was trying to stand again. Sam grabbed him by the back of his pants and pulled him hard. Roja fell back, collapsing to the ground, as Sam dove onto him like an animal. Sam slammed his fist into Julio's face over and over again, content to continue raging and pounding until this horrible man's head was nothing more than wet chunks of blood, tooth, and bone. He punched for Carolyn, for Eric, for Joe, and even for himself. Despite his noble intentions, a small part of his mind reveled in their revenge. This monster had taken his career from him, had murdered good men and women he'd called friends and colleagues, and was going to kill his entire family in front of him if he got his way in this encounter. Roja had to die, here and now. It was for the good of everyone and everything. His men would be better off without him, and his murderous temper. The people of New York would be safer with this menace off the street. And of course Sam and his family would finally be able to live in peace, with this horrible man and his vendetta put behind them at long last. Roja's face was a mess of blood and swollen flesh. He tried his best to cover up with his arms, but it was no use. Sam was all over him, and his strikes were only starting to fall harder and faster. Sam clasped his hands together and raised them high over his head, determined to end this battle with one final strike, caving in Julio's face once and for all. But Julio wasn't nearly as down and out as Sam had thought. As he raised his hands over his head for one final triumphant strike to end it all, Julio sprang into action, slamming a fist into Sam's stomach and doubling him over. Roja's face twisted with hate as he grabbed Sam by the back of the head and pulled him down, all while swinging his own forehead up to meet Sam, right between the eyes. This time it was Sam who fell back, dazed and utterly spent. Roja jumped on him and started to pound at any exposed area on Sam's body, focusing mostly on the head and face. Sam, now completely helpless in the face of this barrage, threw his arms over his face, but Julio's blows were falling with the force of a sledgehammer. He was fighting for his life now, and it was clear from the intensity of his assault that he was trying to end this fight fast. There'd be no more toying with his prey, no more showboating for his uncle and subordinates. Julio had grossly underestimated Sam and had nearly paid for that mistake with his life. It was time to get serious. Time to do or die. "Dad, no!" Eric screamed, though Sam wasn't able to see him from his position on the ground. He imagined his son, a helpless look on his face as he watched his father be pummeled by a monster. "Dad, please get up! Fight back!" Sam was trying. He tried to buck his hips to unseat Julio several times, but Roja was pushing down on him with all of his weight, keeping him rooted in place as the assault continued. There was nothing he could do now. It was just a matter of how long he'd be able to hold on. "Sam!" Carolyn cried, and Sam imagined her, tears streaming down her face as she reached uselessly for him. He pictured Joe, standing there stoically, watching with a stone face, though inside his heart was breaking to pieces. He hoped that somehow, some way, Joe would be able to get his family out of there and keep them safe now that he had failed so miserably. "That's it!" Julio screamed, slamming his fist again and connecting with Sam's temple. Blood was now trickling into Sam's eyes from a split forehead, and he felt his consciousness swirling in and out as he fought to stay awake, looking for any way out of this mess. "You're beaten, and I'm the one who did it. Me, Julio Roja, beat you. Say it. Admit you're done." Sam would do no such thing. He'd never give in, never throw the fight while there was still breath in his lungs. "What about you, big man?" Julio asked, his bloodied and mangled face looking up in the direction of Joe. "You're his second. You want to throw in the towel for this piece of shit and face the consequences like a man?" Sam knew there was no way Joe would ever do such a thing. Not when it meant the ultimate end for not just Sam, but for Carolyn and Eric as well. "It's not over yet," Joe cried back. And Sam could hear the unshakable certainty and faith in that voice he'd known so well for most of his life. "Then you're blind and stupid," Julio responded, looking down at Sam's bleeding face, his single eye making contact with Sam's defiant stare. Sam tried to focus through the blood seeping down his face, wanting Roja to see that in these final moments he wasn't afraid. "Stop it!" Eric's voice cried out, cutting through the tension. "Get off of him, you son of a bitch!" Roja smiled cruelly, looking over in Eric's direction as his fist slammed into Sam's chest once more. "Why don't you make me, Junior?" he mocked, his wicked smile only growing in the face of what Sam imagined must have been an angered, tearful fury demonstrated by his son. "That's right, you can't." Julio punched down again, cracking Sam in the jaw. "You're helpless, just like your old man, and you and your mama are gonna die in the dirt along with him." "I'll show you," Eric cried out, sounding despondent and frustrated in his helplessness. "I'm waiting," Julio said with a laugh, spreading his arms out and goading the young man into attacking him. Sam tried to lift his arms, tried to take advantage of the momentary distraction, but his limbs felt like lead. He was spent, and there was nothing he could do to stop the inevitable. Roja knew it too. That was why he was drawing this out, savoring his victory now that he knew his life was no longer in danger. "Yeah, I didn't think so," Roja said, as Sam imagined Eric must have backed down. "You're all talk and no action, just like your old man." As Julio turned his attention back to Sam, the unmistakable cracking boom of a gunshot rang out from the direction of his family. Julio jerked up and gasped, looking down at his body for any sign of a wound. But he was completely unscathed. He smiled again and opened his mouth to say something before a number of screams from his men drew his attention. Sam watched as Julio's face fell, the mocking smile he'd worn giving way to sheer abject horror. "Tio!" Julio screamed, jumping off of Sam and scrambling to his feet. Sam lifted his head just enough to see Don Eduardo Roja slumped back and held by 3 cartel soldiers, a red stain spreading slowly along his light-colored shirt. Julio stumbled as he ran across the alley, practically diving at his uncle in a panic. Sam's shocked face turned back to his own family, and he saw Joe and Carolyn looking open-mouthed at Eric, who still stood with Carolyn's gun drawn and aimed forward. The teenager's mouth was hanging open in shock as his lip trembled with the unconditional strain of his mounting emotions. "Eric?" Sam spat out, blood flying from his lips as he spoke. "Tio, no! Don't leave me!" Julio screamed in terror. "What did you do?" Joe asked, looking at Eric in shock. I was aiming for..." Eric stammered, tears starting to stream down his face. "I missed." Carolyn was silent, her face pale as she reached a shaking hand toward her son. Sam felt a sudden need to move, a sudden need to rise up and stand in front of his family for that moment when Julio's grief and shock would turn to rage and a need for revenge. He rolled onto his stomach and tried to pull himself up. Joe ran forward, lifting Sam with an arm draped over his broad shoulders. Sam felt solid ground under his good leg once more, keeping his weight entirely off of the injured one, which he held aloft as Joe pulled him away from the battlefield. "What did you do?" Julio screamed from the ground as he cradled the limp, blood-soaked form of his beloved uncle. "What the fuck did you do?" His eyes rose and locked onto Eric with the scorching fury of hell itself. Eric gaped at the drug lord, the gun still raised, as though he couldn't even think of lowering it. "You," Julio cried out, extending a shaking, blood-soaked finger in Eric's direction. "You little... What have you done? There are no words for what you've done, and for what I'm going to do to you." "No," Sam cried out, holding out a hand as though he could somehow stop Julio's rage and vengeance from falling on his son. "Fucking kill them!" Julio screamed to his men, pointing down the alleyway at the family unit, his rage and grief exploding out of him like an atomic weapon. "Fucking kill them all!" The soldiers shouldered their weapons and pointed them threateningly, ready to open fire on their leader's order and bring the might of the Rojas family vengeance down on them once and for all. But before the first of them managed to pull the trigger on their weapon, a series of enormous booming explosions rocked the city. Sam looked up in horror as massive fireballs and plumes of smoke rose into the air. Joe nearly fell with the force of the quake beneath them. "Grand finale," Joe whispered to Sam. A huge building on the other side of the alley behind the cartel members erupted in an immense fire conflagration that sent out a shockwave that toppled all of Rojas' men and slammed into them hard enough to force Joe back. Eric toppled, collapsing onto the ground in a limp heap, and Carolyn was thrown from her feet, landing in a seated position. Despite the pain she was feeling, she instantly crawled toward their son, reaching out to grab him by the shoulder and shake him back into the land of the living. "Baby, come on," she screamed to him. "We gotta move." "She's right," Sam said up to Joe. "We gotta go now." "Get up," Julio screamed from the ground, still unwilling to let go of his uncle's body as explosions continued to rise up around the city. "Yeah," Joe said, throwing Sam over his shoulder and running to Carolyn. Eric was starting to stir, and Joe reached down to grab him by the arm and wrenched him roughly to his feet. "You want your family to live?" he asked him over the sound of explosions and carnage tearing through their former home. "Then you need to shake it off and move your ass." Eric nodded and stood tall, reaching out a hand toward Carolyn, who looked terrified in the face of these events. "Go now!" Sam screamed, and Joe took off running with Sam over his shoulder. Carolyn and Eric were keeping pace with them, and Sam was happy to see Eric clutching his mother's hand, though he wasn't sure whether this was Eric supporting his mother or Carolyn supporting her son. Perhaps it was both of those things. Either way, it was needed in the moment. They had to make their way from this place to escape this horror together as a family, like Sam had always intended. Smoke poured into the streets, shrouding them from their enemies as they continued their frenzied flight. The explosions were deafening, but through it all, Sam could still hear the sound of Roja raging and screaming into the calamity. "Get them!" he roared. "Kill them! Kill them! Fucking kill them!" Chapter 17. Joe set Sam down on the side of the road as soon as they were across the bridge. It had been a tumultuous series of hours as they'd run through the chaos of exploding buildings, walls of smoke, and panicking, stampeding people. But somehow, through it all, the four of them had managed to stick together and make their long-awaited escape from the city. Sam had felt completely useless, as Joe carried him from the city limits on his shoulder like a sack of old flour. While they had escaped the cartel and avoided the death and destruction that had completely overtaken the entire city, Sam realized the only reason they managed this daring escape was due to chance. He'd failed epically in his attempt to fight Julio man-to-man. He'd fought with all he was worth, pushing himself to the absolute limit. But in the end, he was no match for the powerful drug lord. Had it not been for Eric's intervention, and the subsequent bombing of the city by this still unknown terrorist threat, they would all be dead right now. Sam looked over at Eric, who sat off to the side on his own, arms folded over his chest as he leaned against the hood of a car and looked down at the road. He'd fired that gun with the intent to kill, and he had succeeded in taking a life. However, it wasn't the life he had intended to end. Sam sighed and tried to figure out what he could say that might soften this horrifying blow. Don Eduardo was as much a deranged, ruthless murderer as his nephew. Sam actually believed the old man was far more dangerous than Julio because he was smarter and more calculating than his hot-headed successor. By taking the Don off the field, Eric had actually given a great gift to the people of New York. But he was sure the boy wasn't seeing it that way. Then there was Joe. While he'd performed admirably as Sam's second, and was essential in getting them out of the city unharmed following the duel, Sam knew his friend well enough to know he was feeling a lot of stress and guilt over his inability to act while the apartment had burned around them. When faced with the blazing room, Joe had frozen, transported back to the most horrible moment of his life. Sam's heart went out to him over that, and he wished he knew how he could help his friend overcome that trauma, or at least that just because he froze in one instance, he could see he was still an absolutely essential part of their continued survival. Joe had walked away after setting Sam down, moving off in the distance to sit on the hood of a cop car, where Sam saw him rotating his shoulders and grimacing. He'd carried Sam the entire way out of the city, and that was in no way an easy trek. Other survivors passed the small family as they fled the city as well, though it wasn't nearly as many as Sam had assumed would flee in the wake of the bombings. He wondered if these New Yorkers were so determined to remain in place due to the sense of pride and belonging they felt within the limits of the city, or were they unwilling to let the terrorists win? Regardless of their reasoning, it seemed as though the vast majority of New York City residents were willing to tough it out and see their city through this crisis together. Sam respected them for that, though he was no longer one of them and couldn't bring himself to feel that level of loyalty to a place. His loyalty was to people, to his family and friends, to the people waiting back on the farm who relied on him to keep them safe and create a sustainable community. The enormity of that task weighed on him as well. For so long now, his only thought had been reaching Carolyn and Eric and seeing them safely out of the city. Now that this task was done, he had to think about the future. He had to start worrying about his farmhands, who were likely bringing their families back to the farm at that moment. The farm was large enough to create a thriving community. It also had its own water source and sustainable fields that they could use for growing crops. If protected and treated right, the farm could become a safe haven for Sam and his chosen family. But a lot of work was going to have to go into the property before it could support all those people. Sam looked over to see Carolyn slowly walking toward him, her face still a grimace of pain as she dealt with the agony of a gut wound. She'd put her pain to the side in order to focus on their escape, and Sam had been impressed by her resolve. Of course, he wasn't surprised by it. Carolyn was the strongest and most capable person he'd ever known. "How's your leg?" she asked, slowly settling down on the ground beside him. "I'll be fine," Sam replied, reaching over to take her hand in his. She gave his fingers a reassuring squeeze and smiled sadly at him. "We made it," she said, with a little chuckle at the end. "I can't even believe we're out of the city right now." "Did you think we were going to make it?" Sam asked, wondering if her faith had been shaken throughout the tribulations they'd endured. "No," she replied with a slow shake of her head. "It's not that. It's just that I wouldn't let myself think ahead, you know. I wasn't about to start thinking about the future and where we were going. It felt like, I guess, jinxing it." "Yeah," Sam said, When you're in the shit like that, it's hard to think beyond it. Like if you push your mind away from here and now, you're going to lose your focus and something is going to just go wrong, Carolyn finished for him, after he'd trailed off. But we did it. We made it out. All of us, alive and mostly well. Are you well? Sam asked, looking over at both Joe and Eric, and letting a long, deep sigh push through his lips. Seems like we all came out of this with some damage, whether physical or mental. Carolyn's face turned toward their son as his gaze remained locked on the ground. I'm worried about him, Carolyn said, the weight of the world straining her words. Sam, he's not like us. I saw it through this whole journey. He's a strong kid, Sam said, giving Carolyn's hand a squeeze. No, he's not, Carolyn insisted, looking into his eyes with severity. Sam straightened up and looked at his wife, trying to get to the bottom of her meaning. What do you mean? He asked. Carolyn paused, looking back over at Eric, as if to make sure he couldn't hear what she was about to say. Sam, we raised a good kid, she said, and Sam could hear the pride in her voice as she spoke. We raised a boy who was kind, compassionate, generous, and understanding. And for that, I'm internally thankful. But he's soft, he's naive, and he can't function under stress. I've seen it many times since the EMP went off. Sam squinted in confusion at his wife, shaking his head slowly. But we've been teaching him, preparing him for something like this his entire life, Sam said. He knows how to fight. He knows how to shoot. He knows how to survive. Yeah, Carolyn said, nodding in agreement. He knows how to do all those things, but he can't actually do them. There's a big difference between shooting bean cans in the field and shooting a human being trying to kill you. Sam was quiet as he contemplated his wife's words. He absorbed her meaning, and suddenly, many of the things he'd seen since reuniting with his family started to make sense. When Sam had come through the apartment door, Eric had fired on him in a blind panic, and he'd missed. When he killed Eduardo, he had intended to kill Julio. Again, he'd missed his target completely and acted out in a moment of fear. Sam always had believed that, should the time ever come, when such a cataclysmic event would occur, his boy would be well prepared. But it seemed as though the opposite were true. Sam looked over at Eric and stared hard at his son. He was going to need more from him as the world continued to change. That meant more attention, training, tough love, and support as he adapted to how things needed to be done now. I'll need to talk to him, Sam said, turning back to his wife, with a sad look of defeat on his face. You know you did the best you could, Carolyn said, as if reading his mind. You didn't fail him, I promise. He was just never fully tested before. But I saw some marked improvement in just this short time. Don't worry, babe. He'll learn. And we'll guide him however we can. Sam gave a sad smile and moved his head forward until the two of them were touching foreheads. You're right, he said, leaning in to kiss his wife on the lips. In all of the hustle and bustle of their escape, there had been no opportunity for any kind of intimate reunion. Sam allowed this second to play out and enjoyed the feel of her touch once more. In his darker moments, while traveling to the city and battling through it, he worried endlessly that moments such as these would never come again. I'm always right, she said with a smirk, pulling away from him gently. Sam laughed in response, his eyes traveling down from her face, over her neck and chest, to settle on her stomach. He could see a splotch of redness along the front of her shirt and reached a hand toward it. Are you all right? He asked her, his fingers stopping just short of the fabric that covered her wound. It hurts, but I'm alive, Carolyn said with a shrug. It's not a scraped knee, but it's also not childbirth. Sam laughed. Well, thank goodness for that, he said, thinking back. Pretty sure you nearly tore my arm off during that. Well, you needed to feel some pain, too, Carolyn remarked with a smirk. Wasn't letting you off scot-free. Noted, Sam said with a weary smile. Carolyn lifted her shirt slightly to show Sam that the stitches were holding. It seemed as though one or two had popped during their frenzied flight from the city, however, and that would need to be addressed. You're missing some stitches, he noted, pointing at her stomach. Yep, she replied with a nod. And I'm more than capable of patching myself up while you head over to talk with our son. Sam nodded in agreement. That's probably a good idea, he said. Do you need help standing? She asked, her face suddenly falling in concern. Nah, I got this, Sam replied, groaning as he grabbed onto the car he was leaning against and pulled himself back up, mostly supporting himself with his good leg. We're getting there, he said, gingerly bending his wounded knee a few times. Good, Carolyn said. We need you back in top shape for what's coming. Yeah, Sam replied, his thoughts moving on to darker images of a potential future. He limped along the road, using some of the disabled vehicles to keep himself upright. Despite the pain, Sam impressed himself with how easily he was able to hobble over to the spot where his son sat. But he was dismayed when Eric didn't so much as look up as he approached. Hey, son, Sam said, and Eric's head jerked up in alarm, as though he'd been completely unaware of his father's approach, which was troubling for Sam. He hadn't been silent as he limped and grunted along the road, which meant that Eric was deep in his head. No good could come of that right now. Oh, Eric said in surprise, as his eyes focused on his father's face. Hey, Dad. How are you feeling? Sam asked, scooting over next to his boy to lean with him against the car's hood and take pressure off his injury. Fine, Eric replied simply, his voice quiet and far away. There was no confidence in his tone, and a deep sadness fell over his eyes. Additionally, Sam noted that the young man was wringing his hands anxiously, his fingers interlocking and moving apart, over and over again in an endless cycle. Son, you've never been a liar, Sam said with gentle admonishment. I don't want you to start trying to become one now. I'm not lying, he insisted, though his voice didn't grow any louder. I'm just thinking about stuff. Well, Sam said, watching as the movement of Eric's hands intensified. What are you thinking about? He watched Eric's lips curl inward as he desperately looked for the words needed. But Sam was patient, and he wanted his son to be able to express himself in whatever way he was most comfortable. Who was he? Eric asked simply, looking up at his father with unshed tears glistening in his eyes. The man I fought? Sam asked. His name is Julio Roja. He was a drug kingpin I tangled with back in my days with... No, Eric said, shaking his head as a tear fell down his cheek, leaving a wet streak on his dust-caked face. That's not what I meant. I meant, the man I... His voice trailed off as emotion choked him. Ah, Sam said, coming to understand who his son was referring to. That man was Don Eduardo Roja, and he was not a good person, son. But who was he? Eric asked, his eyes wide and lips slightly parted. He looked desperate for answers as the vast unknown pressed down on him. He wanted more than just a name. He needed to know more about the actual man, the life he'd brought to an untimely end. He was a cartel drug lord, Sam answered honestly. He was a vicious murderer, a ruthless criminal. He was Julio's uncle and taught him everything he knew about the drug business. So he wasn't a good person then? Eric asked, and Sam sized up the moment to try to bring his son some relief. Son, he was one of the worst men who ever lived, Sam replied, keeping his face severe as he tried to convey the true horror that was Eduardo Roja. He was responsible for hundreds of deaths, maybe even thousands. A lot of them were people he killed personally. He's killed men, women, and children without a second's hesitation. Eric's eyes widened as his father described the depth of the Don's criminal record. But he was just one old man, Eric said, shaking his head and casting his eyes down to his wringing hands as another tear fell. One helpless old man. That man was not helpless, Sam said, reaching out and laying one of his strong hands over Eric's to stop their ceaseless movement. He was a stone-cold killer, a murdering bastard. He would have killed every single one of us without a second of thought and celebrated it with his men after. Son, I'm not trying to downplay the severity of what happened or make things up for your benefit. What you did was something that had to be done. It was something the entire NYPD has been trying to accomplish for decades. It's a good thing, not just for us, but for the entire city. Eric was quiet for a long moment, and Sam hoped his words were soaking into his brain. He silently prayed his son would be able to come out of this, that he'd be able to see that what he'd done, however accidental, was for the greater good. Dad, Eric said, looking up at his father with weary, sad eyes. Does it ever get easier, killing someone, even someone who deserved it? Sam sighed and paused for a long moment, contemplating the question seriously. He remembered the first time he'd been forced to gun someone down as a young officer. It was an armed robber who had opened fire on him and his partner from inside a convenience store. Sam put him down with a bullet to the face. The gruesome sight of that man's mutilated features as blood poured out from the wound he inflicted would haunt Sam for years to come, and sometimes he could still see it. But the people he'd been forced to kill since then, even those he'd gunned down over the last few days, held no place in his mind or heart. He wasn't sure if that was good or bad, but he knew what kind of answer he could give to Eric's question. Yes, Sam said simply. Yes, it does. Eric was quiet for nearly a full minute, looking up at the sky as he seemed to contemplate this information. When he looked back down at Sam, his face was full of an even deeper sorrow. I'm not sure I want it to, he said.